First off, I was going to try and turn your attention back to the last time we were talking to give a little bit more attention for a second to a quite apt description that got thrown in right at the tail end about the idea of man's continuing kind of leapfrog, this normally unanalyzed sense of progress, the evolution of man's intellectual secondary world combined within the idea of a stadium. You could look at it as though you would spend your formative years, which you could look at as being your teen years, I guess, but right up before you became a full functioning ordinary adult. These kind of formative years you could look at like this being this great stadium, and you spent the years out there in the parking lot. You're kind of laughing, hassling the people going in. You know how jive-ass kids are, some of you especially. And then it's as though you finally kind of grow up, give in, and you go hand in your ticket, and you go ahead and you go into the intellectual stadium. And by and large, once you get in the stadium, what you do is then you just watch. Remember, we're talking about an intellectual stadium. We're talking about a secondary stadium. We're talking about the stadium that is within man's own nervous system, that which, as far as you can see in a three-dimensional existence, it is a stadium peopled by no one else but Homo sapiens. You end up in the stadium, by and large, just watching. You're watching the players, that is, other people think. And think includes all sorts of things. It includes all sorts of creative activities. It includes everything, if you've been following it, that would not be primary activities. Anything that would be, in a quite real sense, singular to man's existence on this planet. You, by and large, then, after you get old enough, turn in your ticket, quit jive-assing around the parking lot, harassing other people, laughing at them. Well, that's just part of the nature of being in your formative years. But you end up going in the stadium. You can count on that. Well, some people do not ever, in a sense, go in the stadium. But from any sort of ordinary view, you wouldn't want to be there. They get kicked around, beat up. They get hassled in a way that you wouldn't believe. Well, you would believe it. Just consider the matter of insane asylums, homes for the terminally curious, disturbed, prisons, large boxes in which refrigerators and washers may have been at one time delivered and are now serving as condos. Everyone who is singing, everyone who is constituting the bell curve of life's healthy body of man goes into the stadium. But after that, in the singular affairs of man, what you end up doing, by and large, is you watch then everyone else play the game. You watch everyone else secondarily eyes. You watch the other players think. Quite specifically, to carry it just a little bit further, you also end up cheering for the home team. That is, for correct, proper thinking. Of course, that which agrees with yours. Cheer them on and boo the opposition. Does that not about cover it? And it covers it all the way from the literal to being in a stadium and cheering for the home team, football, rugby, soccer, and booing the out-of-towners. But in the secondary and the symbolic stadium, in which everyone's nervous system ends up in a seat on a particular side of the field at any given time, and you can switch sides all the time, but at any given play, that is, any given thought, any idea, piece of work, piece of music, philosophy, the way somebody looks, you look at them and you are a partisan. You are cheering your opinion. And at that particular time, you're on the side of the field wherein everyone, and everyone may just be your partner. It may be your girlfriend, maybe your wife, your husband. It may be some whole group that's just an ad hoc group of you and a bunch of guys standing around there on the street corner drinking beer, and somebody goes by and somebody says, blah, 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 that kind of person. And they, oh. Yeah. Right that second, there's an ad hoc side of the field. And everyone is cheering. Everyone is in agreement. You are surrounded only by those of the same persuasion. You're always on the right side of the field if you're in the stadium. And you correctly, as you have no choice doing at that level, you cheer the home team. If you don't, you're nuts. You cheer your thoughts. And you boo the opposing thoughts. In the widest sense of thoughts, you understand. All of the activities in which man can engage that are unique to him. All the arts, these sciences, almost, you can just say everything above primary acts of sex and eating to stay alive and getting out of the elements, etc. But everything else, you cheer your own home team in a quite passionate way if you're just ordinary. You're in the stadium, and now you, by and large, watch. Now, I know that some people, you might be thinking, well, I and other people do engage in some activity. There are people who write books. There are people who write novels. There are people who are engaged in scientific research. There are people who are out writing symphonies, who are painting. There are people doing more than watching. Hold on. Hold on to your seat cushion. You don't have to, but it makes you feel good to think, yeah, I better, because I might lose my place. Fat chance. I might leave and I can't come back and get my seat back. That only happens at your local stadium out there. Where you are, you don't go away and come back and somebody's taking your seat. Not unless you get in the middle of the night and go out, to the bathroom and come back and get into bed and start to lay down and somebody else is in your brain. Of course, some of you may have thought that, but I don't want to hear about it. Don't give me the willies. You belong back on the parking lot where they can look after you. At any rate, you cannot imagine when I say cheering the home team and booing the opposition. Can you imagine? Just in case you missed the quite tangible, pragmatic aspect of this symbolic perusal. Would anybody give their opinion on something? Someone said, what do you think of the post-impressionist painting? What do you think of the 20th century composers? What do you think of heavy metal? And you go, well, I don't like it. Of course, I don't agree with that opinion. There's a lot of things I don't like, and I think it's dumb, but I don't like it, and I can't help. You hear where it's going, don't you? In case any of you are looking blank, it would sound insane coming from anybody but me. To say, it's like somebody said, would you like to have a Coke? Would you like to have a soda? And you say, yes. And they start telling you one, you say, I hate it, but I always have to say yes because I do not want one, and I always want to say no. What do you think? Get away from me. You cheer the home team, and you boo the opposition. Does that not about cover it? Now we'll pretend for a second that was just sort of a pickup from last time, and we will plunge right in to the deep end of the pool. Considering another very material, a very serviceable aspect of the little thing we've been talking about, of thinking more than you have to. There is a very specific aspect of this, in that to be able to do this is the only way that you can move into a new neural location internally, wherein thought can analyze itself. Not other people's thoughts, and not other people's apparent thoughts about your thoughts. That is, their criticism of your thoughts, which is back to those of you that have already forgotten when I said hold on to your seat cushion, of believing, well, I do have original thoughts. I don't just go in a stadium, to take your little metaphor. Symbolism. All right, symbolism. I don't go into the stadium now that I'm an adult. I didn't just die. I didn't wither. Only you know, but I didn't wither and dry up. I'm still active. I'm writing music. I'm working on my novel. I even sit around and think philosophical thoughts in my spare time, on my own. But what we're going to get to is thought of a certain kind being able to analyze itself, which is an aspect, which is a condition possible only through something extraordinary, and for the time being I'm calling this extraordinary effort, this out of the ordinary effort, thinking more than you have to. I could call it something else. I was going to call it Amico Oil, but I found the name had already been taken. And I am not going to be sued again by some of these phony baloney, etc., etc. Thank you. There is a way in which thought can analyze itself. But at the ordinary ground level in the stadium, at anywhere you might normally be seated, even if you thought, even if you said, well, I am not just a passive observer here in the intellectual stadium. I am active. But then you would have to ask, do you analyze what people think about what you do? All right, do you think about what other people think about what you do? When you present your new painting, when you ask somebody to read a few chapters in your novel, when you tell someone about, I have been considering the growing political unrest stretching from the Baltic area to the Balkans, and my opinion is such and such, and you say it, do you then analyze? Do you take any recognition of someone else's thoughts about what you think? In the stadium, I will answer for you. The answer is, do I have a choice? So, that was a little sidestep. Just remember, when I'm saying that only by some unordinary method, which we're still calling thinking more than you have to, is it possible to get to a place here that thought can analyze itself. I want to distinguish that as not ordinary thought of it attempting to, as it might want to respond, your ordinary level of intelligence, that yes, I do analyze thought. Yeah, I know. But it's only two kinds. That's not what I'm talking about. You analyze what other people are thinking, that is to criticize it. To either cheer it on or boo it. Or, it's actually the same thing, but it always sounds better to be able to hold up 3 fingers. Well, whatever that is. You are not analyzing, your thought is not analyzing itself. Your thought is analyzing the players on the field, or, what can be tricky, when you really look pensive, reflective, is you are analyzing other people's criticism of you. In other words, instead of you criticizing and analyzing their thought, which you were trying to say, well, yeah, that's analyzing, thought analyzing itself. So instead of you analyzing other people's thought, you have simply held up a what? Traffic? Nah, a kind of mirror. That now you are criticizing, that is analyzing, their analyzation of your thought. Now that would keep a man pretty well tied up, even an intellectual man, for the rest of his life. Even those in the world of academia. Because what else is there? You try to dance a few steps, you get your doctorate and whatever, you try to write a paper, and of course it's got to be sane enough that they don't laugh you out of graduate school, away from the boards, but it's also got to be just new enough, apparently, that it's like you ran out on the field, you got your second out there, and you run a little play, do a little dance, sing a little song, whatever happened to Casey and the Sunshine Band, but it's got to be just different enough that they go, well, derivative reminds me a lot of Dos Passos, Monet, Mahler, Dunn, but with a slightly new twist. As always, it has got to be just sane enough, not to be disturbing, but just new enough that it seems to be, recall, this kind of process that I was saying is another way to picture the intellectual stadium, this evolvement at the ordinary level of that which seems to be real and acceptable soon becomes too old. And then people have to pretend. And then they forget that they were pretending in a relative sense, and that becomes real. And so, to even get somewhere in the world of academia, in the ordinary world, what would appear to be, from the city sense, the real cutting edge, the real advanced guard of human society, you still have to be, if I may turn a phrase, you've still got to have one foot solidly in the conservative camp of old literature, old art, old civilization, yesterday. And just barely sort of kind of putting your toe out just enough that those who are listening to some of you giving an oral presentation of your doctorate attempt, just enough to maybe titillate them a little bit. They think, well, and they're all thinking in their own brains. They're maybe, let's say that a few of them's cheering you on, a few of them's already kind of booing when you came in wearing that purple bow tie. But they try to give you the benefit of the doubt, being the objective intellectuals they are. But some of them begin to think as you begin to talk, well, that is very, very reminiscent, he may not think I know it, of some of the unpublished works of Thomas à Becket, which is pretty strange since none of his works were published. But the guy may be thinking that just to impress himself. But he goes, and yet, it has a slight difference because, if for no other reason, this guy's alive. So, it may have some promise, right? All of that was for the sake of comparison and to kill 10 minutes. I don't know. No. There is a distinction that I'm going to try to make you see. Let me take what has been historically, honorably accepted as a worldwide, several translations, but in every so-called culture there's some form of this, as you know. The old idea of know thyself, as ancient, as honorable a directive as that is, there has been, and people even feel it in a sense, the nervous system. But there has always been a certain unmeasured element lacking. Always. The people can parrot the phrase, they can hear it in their nervous system as though Jim Henson was still alive with his hand up your jockeys. Making you go, yes, yes, know thyself, there's no doubt about it. And yet something, if I took the same people that would most seriously, throughout history, at any place, if I were speaking in their own time and own place and own tongue, they'd go, yeah, there's no doubt, Jesus, that's important. If I said, but doesn't there seem to be something else? I mean, you say, know thyself, and you go, yeah. Don't you keep wanting to go, well, is there, can you tell me something else? And especially if you talk to people that say, I have really devoted myself. I've read, I've reflected, I've meditated, I've discussed with other people. And I feel like, in a sense, that you've made some progress. Well, yeah, and no. I don't feel like I wasted my life, but I've been sitting around, shooting this BS with my friends around the coffee shop or around the halls of Ivy, until she got tired of us and told us to go to somebody else's hallway. But it has been profitable. I've enjoyed it. But if I said, all right, can you recall when you were a little teenage nipper out in the parking lot and you first picked up a book, if you were from the Western world, Herr Plato and the whole idea of know thyself and the Socratic discourses and dialogues, yeah. Can you remember, because I was there, let's say that you were playing Supernatural, and you said, and I remember your little nervous system trembled, as did many people's, and you read that and you went, ooh, that's it. That's what I've been, ooh, that's it. Yeah, I remember that. And you really tried to do it. Yeah, I have. No, not 24 hours a day, but it has stayed on my mind, and I reflect on it, and times get bad, times get good. I read, I discuss. But in a sense, may I ask you, has it really made any difference? First remember that the guy, well, let's say that we sort of agreed that, all right, do you think you know yourself now? Let's say that you're 45 or 50. All right. Do you know yourself more than you did when you were 17 out in the parking lot? Yeah, I'd have to say I do. All right. Can you say that have you really benefited? And I'll go back again. Let's say the guy says, well, no, I'm not complaining because I would not have swapped any of that. I can't think of anything looking back that I enjoyed more, as much as I enjoy having a few drinks and playing music or jumping in the back seat of a 59 Dodge with a nice looking waitress. But I can't say that I have not enjoyed my discussions, my reflections throughout these years with other people, with writers of the past, of discoursing with them through the printed word. Not Mr. Beckett, but I can't say it's been wasted, but to answer you truthfully, you're asking me have I actually benefited. You know, it's weird, I can't really say. Something is lacking. First off, let me point out that historically, which we can point back through that ordinary line of time and start pointing to use Western orientation to the great Greeks and to other cultures, or we can look in your own nervous system back when you were 17 out in the parking lot, and you were, if you were in the Western world, you were in the glory days of Greece, and that you were already affected by know thyself. If we're talking about apparently externally back then, or if we're talking about apparently internally with you 20 or 30 years ago, it's at that level men have applied the know thyself to behavior. That is the beginning. That is of no great importance, but since I brought it up, that is why you could take an ordinary, talking about an ordinary person now, a man, 50 years old, and he doesn't have to be a philosopher. And if you say, do you know yourself? You ever heard the idea that an unexamined life is not worth living? No. You ever heard know thyself? No. But you get the drift of it, know thyself, that there's been philosophers thousands of years ago. Is the world that old? Yeah. Is it that said that it'd be a benefit to know thyself? And the guy goes, okay, I got you. Yeah, I can dig that. I can go with that. And I say, all right, but you never thought about it. No, I even heard it until you said it. All right, let me ask you this. Would you say, you're 50, yeah. Would you say that you know yourself now better than you do when you're 17? Oh, hell yeah. His genes are wearing out. He's not as horny as he was. He is describing behavior. What he is saying, without knowing it, is I am now more predictable in my behavior than I was at 17. Because he looks back at 17 and he thinks the many nights he was so drunk he didn't know where he was, and the many times he had to jump out second-story windows from married women's husbands, the many times that suddenly he was on a job that he had had and somebody came up to him, as the foreman, and said, I told you one of those packages. And I said, hey, stuff it, Jack. And I left and got in the car and drove to Omaha overnight. Showed up with no money. God, I was nuts looking back. And so, I did not know myself because I was not predictable. And all he is saying, remember that Kyroots, that perhaps a city man's best ally. It's aging genes. Tiring hormones. And so a guy 50 can say, there's no doubt about it, I'd never heard it, but you're right, I know myself now in a way that I couldn't even imagine, not even heard the term. But looking back, yes, I know myself now more. I guess I'm a philosopher and didn't know it. But I know myself more than I did when I was 17. But all he is saying, without knowing it, is, hey, I'm 50. I'm not as horny. I'm in debt. In fact, I shouldn't distract you from all that. It is simply that he's wearing out. It is simply that his hormones are running low. They are no longer as active. They are no longer 17-year-old hormones. They're 50-year-old hormones. And all he is saying, he's speaking of behavior. But you understand at the ordinary level, surely you follow this, it's not an attack on that. That's not the point. But an ordinary person in all, what do they call it? Truthfulness and sincerity would say, being a philosopher or not, they would say, I do know myself now better than I did when I was 17. But what are they talking about? Behavior. That's it. Now that's as far as it goes with people who ever heard the term and thought they were considering it and trying to pursue it and ponder it and think about it and analyze it, are those who didn't. People 50 years old, philosophers or not, 50 years old, college education or grammar school dropout, will tell you that they know themselves better than they did when they were 17, and they are telling the truth. But all they're telling is that their behavior is more predictable. They're speaking of behavior. That's no great point. This is just to try to slip you up somewhere else now. From one view, some of you caught that, you could, based on that ergo, say that such things as psychology has been a step forward Because just ordinary psychology now, what it has done is by and large, since everyone likes that term, send us over too cold by and large. I suddenly thought I was back in the stadium. No crowd on mine. And don't any people from, never mind. In a sense, you could look at psychology vis-a-vis men 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, or you 30 years ago, looking upon the idea of know thyself as being a matter directed toward behavior. You can look at psychology, institutionally, widespread, or in you, the individuals, the change in a kind of orientation in the nervous system if people have become more civilized. That psychology you could look at as being a kind of mechanical step forward in that it has turned their attention by and large, or more, to the mind. But where does that leave someone who was trying to do something extraordinary? Well, it has shifted. You can look at it. You follow by now when I say a kind of institutional, a kind of collective move forward, which is not to knock it. It has been necessary. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing right with it. There's no need to cheer, and there's no need to boo. We're not here to support psychology if you know what you're doing, and we're not here to attack it any more than we are. God forbid. General Motors. I thought you would see the significance based on that. But this widespread, this kind of collective movement from men being with the attitude that it would be good to know ourselves, that we are a conscious, reflective creature. That's why, as they used to say, that the gods gave us a soul. That we would nowadays, more people would say that our intellect has developed so that we can be introspective, we can be reflective, we can analyze ourselves, but we should be doing more than analyzing our behavior. Because if you're a modern person, you're supposed to be civilized. In civilization, the bottom line, the definition still is control over behavior, that is, of facts being able to overcome acts, that you are no longer inclined, whether it be through age or just because of the general effect, the gravity, the burden of civilization. That you no longer are inclined to get roaring drunk and pass out, or to wreck a car, or to jump in bed with your boss's wife. That now your behavior seems to be under control. Whether you're 50 or perhaps you are 17, but you are now civilized. The new generation is civilized enough that even at 17 you don't do those sorts of things. So you could say in a sense you have bypassed, if you're just ordinary, that you have gone past the idea of know thyself being directed toward behavior. And I'm using psychology as just being a collective pointing toward this kind of greater movement, that now the idea of know thyself is directed more toward man's mind than behavior, except for this. It's still not enough to do anything extraordinary, because what it's left with, even though it's turned it more toward man's mind than his behavior, it's turned it toward talk. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but what you've got is still a missing piece. There is a missing element. Because they are dealing with, let's take psychology as being the institution, the discipline, the art, the science. Just using that as an exemplary reflection of man's nervous system progression from just simply being involved and concerned about his behavior. It will assume that you individually and some large group of people are now collectively civilized enough that it's not a continuing problem of do I know myself enough regarding my behavior that I am not a threat, that I'm not going to kill somebody just because they drive too close to me on the expressway, or because somebody breaks in line in front of the checkout counter, and conversely, can I feel somewhat safe that the same will not happen to me? So we're beyond being the crude, feral beast that some bass players are. Well. And so we're into the area now, collectively, if not individually, where your attention is drawn more. Remember, we hadn't left the idea of thought being able to analyze itself. That I just analyze behavior. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm pretty predictable and sane, even if I'm not 50 yet. And now, I am sort of a child of the age of psychology, because I do analyze and reflect, but not on behavior anymore. I can control that. But I do reflect on my mind. So there. Well, not quite. Take psychology again as being exemplary of the individual attitude. It is talk about talk. It is thought about talk. And psychology as a discipline, and you being a part of it, since there is no such thing about psychology without little psychologists, without people. The discipline itself admits, which is just a form of energy coming out of what seems to be an institutional thing, but it admits out front that a full understanding of what is causing men's minds to be what they are, probably without any doubt, is beyond our grasp. That psychology will say that. Again, to be an expert, remember that's one of the ways to be an expert in the city, is to have a glib tongue, probably wear glasses, whether you need them or not, and to have a bushel full of excuses pertinent to your field of expertise. I mean, it just passes for them to say, here are two of the world's, or here are two guys, and one of them, we don't know which, they got a bag over their head, thank God, but one of them is the world's greatest expert in psychology. Guess which one it is? Now, I'll give you a hint. If a hint is, no matter what they say in their opinions, if one of them says, if they say, all right, give us this, give us your wrap-up of where psychology stands today. And they both go, blah, 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 and all kinds of statistics and things you never heard and terms. And if one of them says, but in spite of all the great progress we've made, as much as I love psychology, I have devoted my life to it, as much as its heroes and its thoughts are the beacon that is driving civilization to even greater heights, we've got to admit this, folks. I guess you can talk like that with a bag over your head. Whichever one says, we've got to admit this. Even psychology operating at full steam. We have got to admit at the outset, even today, right this minute, that psychology, and perhaps not now, perhaps never, perhaps nothing in man's life can ever do this. That is, fully explain the causes, the actual drives, the energy running men's minds. In other words, the expert, whichever one hidden under the bag, whichever one admits that we can't do it, he is the expert. But now you should know that. There's a missing ingredient still. I'm just using that, as you know, not to boo psychology, but because they would. The more educated, the more that they would appear to be men of expertise in the field of psychology, in the field of even philosophy and whatnot, if it still had any repute left. They would admit, all right, we study, we're making a little progress, we move along, but psychology, philosophy, we cannot, absolutely. We're not, I don't even see the day that we're going to be able to fully explain, not man's behavior, we can explain that statistically. See, they already passed that. But as far as now the mind, not just his behavior, because we can affect his mind with drugs, conditioning, all sorts of things, they say. But as far as the actual why men think like they do, why they have these delusions, why they have phobias, why they have fears, why they have unreasonable, unprofitable hatreds and emotions toward others, that, I don't know that not only psychology, but I don't know that any of us will ever understand that. Something is lacking. To talk about man's mind, to talk about other people's minds, to talk about their thoughts, how they conflict with yours, to talk about the way their thoughts either boo yours or cheer yours, and vice versa, is still lacking one ingredient. That kind of thought cannot analyze itself. Impossible. All right, a cheap, temporary truism. Jesus, I said temporary, we may not have time to untemporary it. A Ford can never fully grasp the concept of Fordness. To do so, at the very least, would take a Chevy. Dash, parentheses, and then some, which we'll get to later if there was a later. Close parentheses. Inside of a three-dimensional polarized run stadium, to be able to analyze, to have thought that would analyze itself, you would have to be able to change seats. You would have to be able to freely move about the stadium. You would have to be able to abandon this kind of either side of the field loyalty. That is, where you unhesitatingly, where you helplessly know that you belong one side or the other. There's no doubt about it. Unless, of course, you just got through the bathroom. That is, they're playing something on the field, the play you're not interested in. They suddenly do a quick little play that has something to do with neoclassical English poetry. And you think, boy, here's a good chance for me to go take a quick one. So then, you don't have any allegiance. But a man will let his bladder swell up the size of a club foot if suddenly they're going to do something about. Was it actually Clara Schubert or Clara Schumann? And you go, that's what I wondered. Wait a minute. Ooh, wait, I'm not going yet. Because you want to hear. Or they say, can you actually cut off that clearly the movement from the classical era of music into the Romantic, or would you have to put in what some have been wont to refer to as the Rococo overlapping period? Oh yes, wait a minute, I want to hear this. Where are you going to fit Schubert? But you'll go off and you'll go get a hot dog, go get a beer, go take a leak, if it's not a play going on that interests you at that second. Other than that, you have on the field, one side of the field loyalty. You cannot help it if you're sane and your intellect is working. There is no choice in a three-dimensional polarized run. The same old way that if you think, yes, someone says, boy, isn't it hot? And you look down, you're sweating, and you think, God, it's hot. You can't go, oh shit, that's not hot. Or you can't sit down on a hot plate and part of you says, boy, that's hot. You go, that's not hot. You understand, it's just foolishness. And it's not just based upon physical discomfort. For you to have an idea, for you to just be an ordinary person, and they say, well, so you're here to vote. Yes, I am. Or here to register. All right, which party? Are you Democrat or Republican or fascist or communist? And you go, I'm everything. Sir, what are you? Where are you going? I'd like to see a movie here at the complex, and there's 7 little mini theaters. Which one do you want to see? Oh, I don't know. Now, of course, get just a little more subtle. It's no big deal. It's in here you cannot think anything unless it is based upon what you think of 2 and 2 is 4. If I'm going to do my taxes and not get audited again this year, or people laugh at me, which is even worse, the IRS to come over and they send over. At first you think they're carolers, except you realize it's not Christmas, and they get outside your window, and instead of singing carols, you open your window and they all go, ha ha, because you couldn't add 2 and 2. To be able to think in a way to where thought could analyze itself, you have got to be able to abandon the seat, wherever you are. And you have got to even more so be able to move away from. And of course it doesn't count going on the other side. You've got to be able to move away from either of this one side of the field or the other loyalty. If you stay in your assigned seat, if you stay on your side of the field, wherever it is at any given time, that is, if you are a sane, ordinary, everyday, right-thinking, intellectual, reasonable person, you will have allegiances to one of the teams. You've got no control over the team. You've got no control over what's going to be played out on the field. You've got no control over where you are, how you hear them announcing what's going on. Did they say Schubert or Schumann again? I don't shout booer, and you can't wait any longer. You have to go, boo! That's when you had some interest. And later somebody might say, they didn't say Schubert. You go, oh, Jesus. And then you got to explain that, which is good enough. They say, I guess you didn't hear it right. Yay! That's right, I didn't hear it right. Well, I think I misunderstood it. Yay for you, too. There's some people who are going to say that was some kind of psychological or Freudian slip that you're against, that you don't like some of the later Romantic period. Boo on them. If you stay on your seat, on your side of the field, wherever it is, at any given time, if you stay in your seat, what you're limited to is you will, perforce, have allegiances that you cannot help. You will be a flag waver to some religious, some cultural, some racial, some nationalistic, some kind of phony baloney if it gets down to just an ad hoc momentary team. You've got to wave a flag. You're there in the stadium. You got no choice, or you'll go insane. Which you don't have a choice where you could do that. But I'm just saying, if you did have a choice and you were ordinary and went, I'm not going to play. Pretty soon they're going to see your body come flying over the top. And you're going to land out there with a derelict. You're going to land back in the parking lot. If we're going to push it any further, I'm going to have to do it another night. But none of this qualifies as thought analyzing itself. That is what this kind of stuff is about, from one view, from one description, of all kinds of extraordinary mental, and they used to call them spiritual, and all kinds of things that people have gone through in these great experiences. Part of it, a valid description is the people that say they did it, or people who imagine, or from reading that other people did it, is their thought reached a place that it could analyze itself. Try it this way then. We'll tie it all up for the night. It might be a start, if you looked at it this way, to go back to the original symbol. To be able to move to a place that you could think more than you have to. A place wherein, arising from that ability, that you could have thought that could analyze itself. That's period. No conditions, none of this other. As a start, you might say that you would have to become a smooth-talking, all this in quotation marks, surely, you got some extra quotation marks. You'd have to be a smooth-talking, silky-flying, hot-thinking, analytical Goodyear blimp, cruising above everybody else's stadium.